Hello ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, and welcome back to another edition of my videos. And in today's episode we're going to be continuing our adventure as to what to do against all the different continuations after the move 1e4. So we've already covered in our opening repertoire series in detail what to do against e5 and also the move c5. These will make up the majority of our opening repertoire, and these will come up most frequently in your games. With that said, black doesn't always have to play this way, and there is a third very popular option that you could face, and that is the move e6. This is known as the French defence. What's the whole point of this move? Well, e6 is preparing the move d5, taking a stake in the centre and trying to combat white's pawn centre. So after the move d4, d5. So pretty straightforward. We've now got our pawn into the centre, and against this I'm going to be recommending the move e takes d5. This is known as the exchange variation of the French. Now I have covered this line previously in another video that I provided on my e6 opening repertoire guide, and in that video I talked about a little bit of my struggles with the French defence in facing this particular variation. As psychologically speaking, you know, whenever I play any of my games, I want to try and play for a win. I don't find it particularly fun trying to go for a draw with black. I want to try and play for a win and try and attack white with everything I have. The problem with the exchange French is, psychologically speaking, it's very difficult for black to really have any winning chance. White is just going to be developing solidly and soundly and get a nice middle game position. It's very difficult for black to try and create any imbalance. If he tries to force an imbalance, he could also give himself some weaknesses in his position. It's a really easy setup to play, the exchange French. It has very little theory to it, and it's just, I guess, a very nice way to get a nice calm middle game. As I say, with my opening repertoire guide, we're not looking for some crazy tactics, some crazy long 30 move continuations. I just want to get you into the middle game feeling confident as to what you want to do. Okay, so what's the move here that black will play? So quite typically black will capture here on d5. Doesn't really want to capture with the queen as well. This will allow us to develop a knight at some point with some tempo on the queen. So we don't really particularly want to do that. We've actually got here a much worse Scandinavian position, so probably not the best idea to do this. So you're most likely or not going to face this variation. And as you can see here, we have essentially a symmetrical position here. So we have 4 pawns on the queen side, so this side of the board, and we also have 3 pawns on the king side. There's a key feature of this position, it's this open file. What we want to do at some point later in the position is try and get our rooks to this open file as quickly as we can, as this will allow us to try and control a lot of the position. Rooks belong in open files as it allows them to control the most amount of space, and if we can get these rooks onto this file uncontested, we're doing very well in this position. Now I've spoken about this symmetrical pawn structure. So what's a key feature of this symmetrical structure is the fact that neither side has got any real imbalance in the pawn structure. Typically you'll see in other openings there might be positions where, if let's say this pawn was 1 square to the right, let's say it was on e3, you've then got a slight imbalance, as well essentially there'll be 4 pawns versus 3, and if we imagine a pawn here would have 4 versus 3 here. So essentially both sides have got what is known as a passer. So a pawn that can potentially become a passed pawn, so when you get into the late middle game, end game, it can potentially become a queen. However, in this position we haven't got the luxury of that. Neither side has got really any weaknesses in the pawn structure, any ways of trying to push for those pawn breaks like would have in another position like that. With that said, there is one potential way we can force an imbalance in the position, and I'll just show you this alternative. It's a very interesting alternative, and it's been played against me quite a lot when I've played over the board chess. When I was playing as black, it's a very difficult variation to play against, but it's very double-edged. I would say that white is going to play with a weakness, but he also has some strength in that weakness, if that makes sense. So the move, an alternative move that you could play is the move c4. This is known as the Monte Carlo exchange variation. The point being, after, let's say, d takes c4, he doesn't have to do this straight away, black. He doesn't have to play this straight away. He can play it after a couple more moves. We take back the bishop. Now we've got an imbalance in our pawn structure. You'll notice here that white has been left with what is known as an isolated pawn. Very interesting position. The isolated pawn has some strengths. You can see here it's got good control over this e5 and c5 square, and because of this it gives us more space as white. It allows us to develop our pieces very freely, maybe moves like this, castling along here, maybe playing the queen to d2 or something, and we might want to get our rooks typically onto the open files on the side of the rook, on the side of the pawns. Very pleasant position to start with. However, there is one problem. It's a static weakness for white, in the sense that there's a long-term problem with it. If our pieces start to come off the board, this pawn becomes weaker and weaker, and as you get into an endgame, you'll find as more and more pieces come off, this pawn will start to get weaker. And black also has quite an easy plan as well here. Whilst we enjoy this lovely bit of space and we enjoy the development of our pieces, black will be looking to control the space in front of the pawn. If he's able to do that by maneuvers such like this, he tends to have an okay game as well. With that said, it's a bit of a double-edged position. It's very interesting to have a look at in your own time. And I would say play this variation if, let's say, you're in a tournament and it's the final round and you need to get like a win or something to win the tournament. I would say definitely play like this. With that said, the other way I'm going to recommend is the move bishop to d3. Very solid, very straightforward. White has a very simple setup here. He's going to move his knight to e2. He's going to castle, play c3, and get his queen to c2. Very solid, very easy setup to play for. He's going to get his pieces hopefully to good squares, and if he is able to, get his rook onto this open file. If uncontested, he's going to do very well in this position. So let's have a look at an example position. So basically what I'm going to be saying against knight to f6 is always play the move bishop to f4. Get your bishops out. We're normally told to get the knights out first, but here actually the whole point of getting this bishop out early is to try and prevent or exchange off this bishop when this bishop comes onto this square. If, let's say, the bishop comes to g4 here, we don't need to worry too much. We can play the move knight to e2. If c5 is played, black trying to go for his own imbalance, if we captured here and create his own isolated pawn, we should be fine after c3. This is a pretty straightforward, nice, easy structure to play here. We've got simple plans, going to castle here, and then move our rook along. Position's reasonably balanced. White will castle kingside and just get on with his game. So I'll show you another way that black could potentially play against this. So going back after bishop here, knight here, bishop here, they could play the move d6 if they wanted to. It looks quite symmetrical here. At this point, trade the bishops and now play c3. We're slowly getting into our very solid setup now. Castles, knight to e2, knight to c6, castles here. We've got a very solid setup now. We're going to be playing next move potentially either the queen to c2, maybe move our rook to e1, control this open file. An example, if black tries to go for an attack here, we don't need to panic so much. If let's say a move like g4, we'll just play g3. Everything seems fine. If like queen to h4, h3. Doing absolutely fine here. In fact, we'd probably give ourselves a bit of an edge now, as we've got good control over this file. So, as you can see here, very calm position, no dramas, we're not playing, there's no gambits, there's no crazy things that black can do. One other variation, I will show you two more setups that black could employ against us. At this point they can play c5 as well, and it's very similar to what we just saw with the move c4. Black is playing for his own isolated pawn, but again we don't need to worry too much about this. We'll just develop normally, let's say with a move like, I think actually d takes here is probably the best move actually. The bishop captures, knight to f3, knight to f6, castles. We've already got most of our development done. We'll be looking at some future point to try and restrain this black pawn from coming further into the position. We see here already we're controlling the square in front of it. We can play moves like bishop to knight to c3 and then attacking that pawn as well. So black is going to be left with this weakness for the rest of the game, so just play against it. It's on the one hand easy for white, but it's also quite difficult. So as I say, simple plan here, try and exchange off as many minor pieces, as many pieces as you can, try and aim for an endgame. You should do very well against this isolated pawn. So that's one way that black could play. Another setup that you could see after bishop to d3 is the move knight to c6. Black is going to try and go for an imbalanced position, but I'll show you a nice way of handling it. After c3, bishop to d6, essentially black is looking to play his knight here, get his bishop developed, and then queen to d7 followed by a long castle. You could face this occasionally in some of your games. Against this, just develop normally knight to f3, knight g to e7, here castles. If let's say something like bishop to g4, knight e2, queen to d7, knight b to d2. At this point black has an option. He can either castle short, in which case position's fairly balanced, should be absolutely fine, but if he can play for a bit of a crazy position if he wants to with castles long. And against this, I've had this actually a lot on the black side, and it looks really good for black. It looks like he's got almost like a ready-made attack against our white king. But here we have to be very, very aggressive ourselves. We've got opposite side castling. We need to now push our own queen side. This is probably the only time where you'd be pushing the queen side pawns now. We normally would be wanting to try and do attacks along here, but the position's changed a bit. The nice thing about this c3 move is it allows us to play b4. So we could just play b4 here, simple threat of just going up and trying to dislodge this knight away from the position. After a move like knight to g4, we can play b5, knight c, knight to e7, queen a4. We just try and create problems for black now, and I quite like these positions for white. It's very, as I say, it's very double-edged. We're looking to try and jump into this square, try and neutralize black's position as best we can, and bear in mind it looks as though our attack is a little bit faster at the moment against black's setup. Okay, so that's what I'll be recommending against e6. The exchange French, as I say, there's hardly any theory. You don't need to know too much. You just need to know whether or not you move the knight either to f3 or to e2. In most positions, if black is playing relatively unambitiously, you play your knight to e2. If he's playing a bit more of an aggressive setup like this, you play your knight to f3 and you should do fine, but don't worry too much if you play your knight to e2 in the other two positions. I think that's just fine as well. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. As I say, I have covered this on my e6 opening repertoire as well, and some of the setups that black can go into. There's also a great video that you can find online on the Exchange French by a player called Derek Kelly. He's provided a much more in-depth look at some of the lines that can occur in the Exchange French and some of the advantages but also some of the disadvantages by playing this way as well. So if you want a bit of further reading, I would have a look at those positions. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next part where we look at what to do against the Caracal. Take care.